Every 4 weeks, this plant grows back. Cut it down, and it returns stronger than before. Its roots plunge 10 feet deep, mining minerals that other plants can't reach. It produces more biomass per acre than almost any crop on Earth, requires zero fertilizer, and transforms into nutrient-rich compost in just days. In the 1950s, one British scientist became convinced this plant could end world hunger and eliminate our dependence on chemical fertilizers forever. He spent 40 years proving it. Farmers across Europe called it the biological engine of sustainable farming. But today, most gardeners have never heard of it, and you certainly won't find it on industrial farms. This is the story of Comfrey Bocking 14, the miracle plant that the agricultural industry tried to forget, and the stubborn scientist who refused to let it die. What happened next reveals everything wrong with how we grow food today. Before we talk about what went wrong, you need to understand just how remarkable this plant actually is. Comfrey looks unremarkable at first glance. Large, hairy leaves that droop slightly, purple or white bell-shaped flowers that attract bees. It grows in clumps, sprawling across garden beds with an almost aggressive vigor. But beneath the surface, something extraordinary is happening. While most garden vegetables send roots down 2, maybe 3 feet, Comfrey's roots drive 6 to 10 feet into the subsoil. These aren't delicate feeder roots. They're thick, powerful tap roots that function like biological mining equipment, breaking through compacted layers that most plants can't penetrate. And what they're mining is pure garden gold. Deep in the subsoil, below where most plants feed, minerals and nutrients accumulate, washed down by decades of rain and irrigation. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the big 3 that every plant needs, plus calcium, magnesium, iron, and trace minerals. It's all down there, locked away where shallow-rooted crops can't access it, except Comfrey. Those deep roots tap into this underground reservoir and pump nutrients up into the leaves. Here's where it gets interesting. Comfrey leaves contain approximately 2.5 to 3.5% nitrogen, 0.5 to 1% phosphorus, and 5 to 7% potassium on a dry weight basis. That potassium level is particularly remarkable. It's higher than almost any plant material you can find. For comparison, animal manure typically contains about 0.5% potassium. Comfrey has 10 times that concentration. But the real magic happens when you cut it. Unlike most plants that take months to decompose, Comfrey leaves break down incredibly quickly. Their cell walls are relatively weak, and their carbon-to-nitrogen ratio is nearly perfect for rapid decomposition. Lay fresh Comfrey leaves on the soil around your tomato plants, and within a week, they're already turning into a dark, nutrient-rich mulch. Within 2 weeks, they're practically black gold, releasing nitrogen for leafy growth and that precious potassium for flowering and fruiting. Gardeners who discovered Comfrey reported results that sounded too good to be true. Tomato plants that doubled their yield, potato harvests that tripled, fruit trees that produced bushels where they'd struggled before, and the Comfrey kept coming back. Cut it down, and in 4 to 5 weeks, it was ready to harvest again. One planting could feed your garden for 20 years or more. Comfrey wasn't new. Russian Comfrey, Symphytum X uplandicum, had been used for centuries in Europe as livestock fodder and traditional medicine. The name Comfrey comes from the Latin conferva, meaning knit together, because it was used to heal wounds and broken bones. Farmers knew it was vigorous and nutritious, but no one had truly understood its potential as a fertility engine until one eccentric Englishman became obsessed. His name was Lawrence D. Hills, and he was not your typical agricultural scientist. Born in 1911, Hills worked as a journalist and press officer before becoming fascinated with organic growing methods. In the 1950s, as British agriculture rushed toward chemical-intensive farming, Hills went in the opposite direction. He founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association, named after a 19th-century Quaker who had promoted comfrey cultivation. Hills's mission was simple, but radical. Prove that small-scale organic agriculture could be more productive than chemical farming, and comfrey became the centerpiece of his research, but not just any comfrey. Hills was searching for the perfect cultivar, and in 1954, he found it. Working with botanist Dr. Claude Youngman at Bocking, Essex, Hills identified 14 distinct comfrey varieties through careful breeding trials. They tested each for vigor, nutrient content, regrowth speed, and crucially, seed production. Number 14 in that trial, thereafter known as Bocking 14, proved to be the champion. It grew faster than other varieties, contained more potassium, and had one critical advantage: it was completely sterile. This sterility was crucial. Wild comfrey can become invasive, spreading by seed into areas where it's not wanted. Bocking 14 couldn't produce viable seed at all. It could only be propagated by root cuttings, which meant it would stay exactly where you planted it. Hills had created the perfect agricultural tool, maximally productive, minimally invasive. Over the next 4 decades, Hills conducted exhaustive trials. He used comfrey as mulch, liquid fertilizer, compost activator, and animal feed. He tested it on every crop imaginable. He measured yields, analyzed nutrient content, and compared it against chemical fertilizers and animal manures. The results consistently showed that comfrey could compete with or outperform conventional fertility methods. By the 1960s and 70s, Hills was publishing prolifically about comfrey. His books, including Russian Comfrey, 100 Tons an Acre of Stock Feed or Compost for Farm Garden or Smallholding, became cult classics in the emerging organic gardening movement. He wrote for gardening magazines, gave lectures, and distributed Bocking 14 root cuttings to enthusiasts across Britain and beyond. A movement began to build. Market gardeners in England started incorporating comfrey into their operations. Organic farmers used it to reduce fertilizer costs. Homesteaders and back-to-the-landers embraced it as part of self-sufficient living. The Henry Doubleday Research Association grew into what would eventually become Garden Organic, the UK's leading organic growing charity, with thousands of members implementing Hills's methods. The beauty of the system was its simplicity. Hills called it lazy gardening, but it was really just smart gardening. Plant comfrey once around the edges of your garden beds or in dedicated patches. Every 4 to 5 weeks during the growing season, cut the leaves down to about 2 inches above ground. Lay those leaves directly on the soil around your crops as mulch, or add them to your compost pile. The comfrey regrows. You harvest again. The cycle continues. What made this system so effective was that comfrey was essentially a nutrient elevator. It brought minerals from deep in the subsoil up to the surface where annual vegetables could access them. Instead of nutrients leaching downward and being lost, comfrey was reversing the flow. And because the plant was so vigorous, it could produce multiple harvests each year. Hills documented getting 5 to 7 cuts annually in good conditions. The biomass production was genuinely staggering. Hills's trials showed that established comfrey beds could produce 50 to 100 tons of fresh material per acre per year. Even accounting for the high water content, that translated to 10 to 20 tons of dry matter. For comparison, a good cover crop like clover might produce 3 to 5 tons of dry matter. Comfrey was producing 3 to 4 times as much biological material, and all of it loaded with nutrients. Hills also pioneered the use of comfrey liquid fertilizer, which became legendary among organic gardeners. The process was simple, if somewhat aromatic. Fill a barrel with comfrey leaves, add water, cover it, and wait. Within 2 to 3 weeks, the leaves would completely decompose into a dark, nutrient-rich liquid concentrate. Diluted 10 to 1 or 15 to 1, this became a potent feeding solution, particularly valuable for greenhouse crops, container plants, and anything that benefited from that high potassium content. Tomatoes loved it. Gardeners reported that comfrey-fed tomatoes produced earlier, yielded heavier, and showed better disease resistance than those fed conventional fertilizers. The same was true for peppers, cucumbers, and squash. Fruit bushes thrived. Even ornamental gardens benefited. Roses fed with comfrey liquid bloomed more profusely and showed deeper, richer colors. As a compost activator, comfrey was equally impressive. Layering comfrey leaves into a compost heap dramatically accelerated decomposition. The high nitrogen content heated things up quickly, while the diverse mineral content enriched the finished compost. Hills demonstrated that adding just a 10% comfrey layer could reduce composting time by half while producing a higher quality end product. For smallholders and market gardeners, this was transformative. You could establish fertility systems that cost almost nothing to maintain, required no external inputs, and actually improved over time as the comfrey plants matured and their root systems expanded. It was the kind of regenerative agriculture that we talk about today, but Hills was practicing it 50 years ago. Word spread internationally. Hills corresponded with farmers and gardeners around the world, sending Bocking 14 root cuttings to Australia, New Zealand, North America, and parts of Europe. Trials began in different climates and soil types. In most temperate regions, Comfrey performed remarkably well, though it struggled in extremely hot, dry conditions without irrigation. Hills advocated for Comfrey at agricultural conferences and in scientific journals. He argued that small farmers in developing countries could use Comfrey to achieve food security without expensive chemical inputs. He envisioned it as a tool for alleviating poverty and hunger. The data supported his claims. So why didn't the agricultural establishment embrace it? Why didn't Comfrey become a mainstream farming tool? The answer reveals fundamental tensions in how we think about agriculture, progress, and what we value in our food systems. The timing of Hills's Comfrey advocacy is crucial to understanding why it never caught on. The 1950s through the 1980s represented the peak of agricultural industrialization in the developed world. This was the era of get big or get out, when small, diverse farms were replaced by large, specialized operations. When synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides became the foundation of farming. The agricultural chemical industry was booming. Companies like ICI, Monsanto, and others were selling billions of dollars worth of synthetic inputs. Their marketing promised convenience, consistency, and scientific progress. Farmers were told that traditional methods were obsolete, that chemistry had made the old ways unnecessary. Agricultural universities and extension services, often funded by these same chemical companies, promoted high-input farming as the only viable path forward. The message was clear. Modern farming meant synthetic fertilizers, hybrid seeds bred to respond to those fertilizers, and chemicals to manage the pests and diseases that high-input monoculture farming attracted. From this perspective, Comfrey represented a step backward. It required labor. Someone had to cut those leaves every few weeks. It took up space that could otherwise grow cash crops. It didn't fit into the mechanized, large-scale model that was becoming dominant. For a farmer managing 1,000 acres with heavy machinery, the idea of establishing and harvesting Comfrey patches seemed absurdly impractical. The scientific establishment was skeptical too, but for different reasons. Hills was not a formally trained agricultural scientist. He was a self-taught researcher working outside the university system. His organization was small and underfunded compared to government research stations. While his data was often sound, he lacked the institutional credentials that would make mainstream agriculture take notice. Critics questioned whether Comfrey's benefits were as significant as Hills claimed. They argued that any benefits came simply from adding organic matter to soil, not from Comfrey specifically. They pointed out that commercial fertilizers could deliver nutrients more quickly and in more precise ratios. The fact that Comfrey worked was less important than the fact that it didn't fit the prevailing industrial model. Then, in the 1980s, a controversy emerged that would seriously damage Comfrey's reputation. Studies identified pyrrolizidine alkaloids in Comfrey, compounds that could cause liver damage if consumed in large quantities. This was particularly concerning for Comfrey's use as animal feed and herbal medicine. Several countries issued warnings or restrictions on internal consumption of Comfrey. The nuance got lost in the panic. The alkaloid content varied significantly between Comfrey species and varieties. Bocking 14 had relatively low levels. The studies showing liver damage involved massive doses or concentrated extracts, far beyond what anyone would encounter using Comfrey as garden mulch. But the damage to Comfrey's reputation was done. Many people concluded that Comfrey was dangerous and abandoned it entirely, even for uses that involved no internal consumption. Hills defended Comfrey vigorously, pointing out that its external use as mulch and fertilizer posed zero health risks. He noted that humans and animals had used Comfrey for centuries without widespread problems. But the perception had shifted. Something that had seemed like a miracle solution now carried a whiff of danger and controversy. Meanwhile, the convenience factor kept working against Comfrey. As more home gardeners took up growing, many were attracted to the simplicity of bagged fertilizers. Walk into a garden center, buy some Miracle Grow, follow the instructions. It seemed easier than establishing perennial plants, cutting leaves, and managing the decomposition process. The fact that the synthetic approach was more expensive and less environmentally sound mattered less than its perceived convenience. Hills continued his work until his death in 1991, but he must have felt increasing frustration. His life's work had demonstrated a genuinely sustainable, effective, free fertility system. and the world was largely ignoring it in favor of industrial approaches that degraded soil, polluted water, and required constant external inputs. The Henry Doubleday Research Association continued without him, eventually becoming Garden Organic, but Comfrey was no longer its central focus. By the 1990s and 2000s, Comfrey had become a niche interest, known mainly among organic gardening enthusiasts and permaculture practitioners. The agricultural mainstream had moved on. The fertilizer industry had won, or so it seemed. But something interesting has been happening over the past decade. As the problems with industrial agriculture become impossible to ignore, soil degradation, water pollution, climate change, unsustainable energy use, people are taking another look at the solutions that were dismissed decades ago. And Comfrey is having a quiet renaissance. The permaculture movement has embraced Comfrey as a quintessential example of what they call a multifunctional element. One plant that serves numerous purposes: dynamic accumulator, mulch producer, compost activator, bee forage, wildlife habitat. Permaculture designers routinely incorporate Comfrey into their systems, planting it strategically where its deep roots can break up compacted soil and its leaves can feed nearby plants. The story of Comfrey and Lawrence Hills is ultimately a story about choices. Choices about what we value in agriculture: convenience or sustainability, short-term profits or long-term soil health, corporate control or farmer autonomy. Hills showed us that it's possible to grow abundant food while building fertility, supporting biodiversity, and reducing environmental impact. That his solution was largely ignored tells us a great deal about the forces shaping modern agriculture. But we're at a moment where those forces are being questioned. Climate change, soil degradation, water pollution, and growing awareness of industrial agriculture's true costs are prompting a reevaluation. The solutions Hills advocated 50 years ago suddenly look remarkably relevant. Comfrey won't save the world by itself. It's not a silver bullet that can replace all other fertility management techniques, but it is a remarkably effective tool that deserves a prominent place in sustainable food production. For home gardeners, it offers the satisfaction of growing nutrient-rich food using resources produced in your own garden. For small farmers, it offers reduced costs and improved soil. For everyone, it represents a more thoughtful relationship with natural systems. Every Comfrey plant someone establishes today is a small act of resistance against agricultural systems that prioritize corporate profits over ecological health. It's a vote for regeneration over extraction, for working with nature rather than against it. It's also a tribute to a stubborn British scientist who spent his life trying to show us a better way. Hills didn't succeed in revolutionizing agriculture the way he hoped. The industrial food system continued on its problematic trajectory, but his work wasn't wasted. Every gardener who discovers Comfrey, every farmer who establishes a patch, every researcher who validates his observations, they're all continuing his legacy. The biological engine of sustainable farming is still running. It's been idling for decades, largely ignored, but it's ready to work again the moment we decide to use it. Hills once wrote, "The future belongs to those who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit." He spent his life planting Comfrey, knowing that future generations would harvest its benefits. That future is now. The question is whether we're wise enough to recognize the gift he left us. If you want to learn more about growing Comfrey and implementing sustainable fertility systems, links to resources, suppliers of Bocking 14 root cuttings, and further reading are in the description below. The plant that could have fed the world is still here, still working, still waiting for us to notice. Maybe it's time we did.